Good afternoon and welcome to this live talk show. Now today we're going to be taking a look at how we together can end violence against women and girls, which exists in societies across the world. Now for Uganda in particular, as we grapple with the COVID-19 pandemic, the violence against women and girls has only worsened as media and police reports reveal an increase in the cases. Now on August the 1st, one woman met her death at the hands of her partner. The murder of an international hospital Kampala nurse, that was Violet Kakayi, a resident of Kasangati in Wakiso district, who was hacked to death by her husband. It reminded us again that domestic violence kills. Now 595 murders were registered in Bunyoro, out of which 10 were a result of domestic violence. The figures also indicate that 67 cases of gender-based violence were recorded in Hoima district during the COVID-19 lockdown period. April the 17th, police had registered 328 domestic violence-related cases across the country since the lockdown started. Stories we read, sigh and wonder what happened. But this afternoon in the conversation, it will be centering around how we can together end violence against women and girls in the country. I am Rita Kanya and I'll be your moderator this afternoon. Joining me to have that conversation, my extreme left, I do have Immaculate Mugisha, who is a practicing social, gender and health justice lawyer, and she's heading the Advocacy and Strategic Litigation Department at Uganet. Welcome.
Thank you, Rita.
Next to her is Dr. Lydia Munger, who is a medical doctor and she's also Executive Director of Mama Club and a champion for male engagement. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you so much.
And next to her, we do have Beatrice Ajonia, who is also a social scientist and feminist. She is currently the project coordinator at the International Community of Women Living with HIV Eastern Africa for the community led. Now you do go around monitoring and strengthening UN Women, the women's movement to address barriers around SRHR, among other things. Welcome, Beatrice.
Thank you, Rita.
Now we'll start off by just defining, when people hear about violence against women and girls, what forms does this take, Lydia? Sorry, Beatrice. Sorry, Doctor.
Well, violence against women and girls, I would say, for starters, my take on it, it is a despicable and devastating vice that demeans women out there and myself as a woman. Going through violence is something that is despicable, and this is to say that violence in itself has taken very many and various forms, and which span in different forms within the society due to the societal setups, and the societal norms, cultures, and how the society views certain things around them. And because of that, violence has taken the forms of, we have gender-based violence as a form in itself, and then we have domestic violence, and we have structural forms of violence.
Let's first break down when you say gender-based violence.
Gender-based violence basically is that violence that originates from the fact that I, being a woman, I am subject to certain forms of inhuman and degrading treatment, or forms of discrimination or alienation from the society because I'm a woman. Yeah.
And then domestic violence.
So domestic violence is any form of violence that happens within our own homes, houses, and household settings, I should say. Okay. So when we come particularly to gender-based violence, we've seen men battering their wives for failing to do their own roles because they are women. We've seen, which also takes the form of physical violence. We are seeing sexual violence that is mostly in relationships, sexual violence that is perpetrated by other people within society that sometimes relates to rape. Then we have intimate partner violence, that is violence between my partner, my spouse. It could be a husband, a boyfriend, or any other person I have relations with.
Okay. Yeah. Now, when you do mention gender-based violence, you mentioned the domestic part of it. Now, a number of times, just to acquaint the audience with a few terms that we hear of, things like rape, things like defilement. Then there's also, when we mention things like murder as a result of aggravated domestic violence, that sometimes it gets to a point where it could cause someone to lose their life. And how many instances have you seen of this kind?
Currently in Uganda, I should say, right before the COVID, I should say the numbers are quite alarming. And also on the onset of COVID, for Uganda in particular, from the last time I had a police briefing about how Uganda stands in terms of violence, the numbers were over 7,000. And right now, it would be very difficult to tell exactly how many people are actually going through the violence in Uganda in particular, because with the COVID-19 restrictions, we are seeing issues to do with reporting cases, following up cases, and also having these cases go through the justice law sectors. Some of these have ceased, so reporting the exact numbers rather at this moment is something that is blurred.
Okay. Well, bringing Dr. Munger into the conversation. Doctor, when we're having a conversation about violence against women and girls, but you are the executive director of Mama Club, you're also a champion of male engagement. So a number of people might say, well, it's a panel of all just women. Exactly. Where are the men in all of this? Yes, but I think perhaps you represent them in one way or another at this point in time, since you've had engagements with them. But tell us about the violence against women. You've had Beatrice tell us the different forms it takes, women and girls. What's your take on it? What have you seen from your interactions?
I think in the society that we've grown up in, and in Uganda particularly, I mean, and in Africa, we come from a patriarchal society, and where social cultural gender norms actually predispose women to extreme forms of violence. The fact that a woman cannot say yes or no, she doesn't have her own choices. The fact that a woman is supposed to submit to the needs or the commands of her male partner really subjects her to gender-based violence. The fact that men are supposed to be stronger than women, just that the gender roles that have been determined or social, the way we have been socialized, that men are supposed to be more dominant than women, leads to this, and girls and women have been socialized and grown up and brought up like that. That you submit to the man, and so you're not supposed to answer back. You're not supposed to reject whatever he wants from you, and this has really led to the vulnerability of women and girls to extreme forms of gender-based violence, and where I think we have come in, we have actually made it our role to protect ourselves. And we've told our girls that, you need to protect yourselves, don't do this, don't do that, protect yourselves. But we have, in my view, I think we have not really made it. It's also supposed to be a man's role to actually curb gender-based violence. And I think that the men and boys need to actually take an active role in actually fighting gender-based violence.
When you tell the men in your engagements, when you tell the boy child, as I'd like to call them, about this active role that they need to take on, what is usually their reaction?
The way that the boys have been brought up by their parents and what they see, the young boys do what they think their father is the role model. So he says, oh, after all, if my father has been doing this, why can't I do it? You see, the boys sit they've got peer influence, so they sit amongst each other and they tell them, those are just girls. So if they're just girls, then we're the strong ones. So men have been brought up to think that they're supposed to be very strong. They're not supposed to feel pain. They're not supposed to cry. The way that they're socialized, so they feel that, and they've been told that they're the ones responsible for looking after the home, the family. So it gives them that superior thinking and the thinking that they're the dominant partner in all of this. So that makes it say that if they don't like what a woman is doing, if they're angry with a woman, they're supposed to lash out, and lashing out can be verbally, can be physically, and these are the issue. But in our engagement with men, strange enough, because some men do it because they've been socialized and they've grown up like that. But if we sit and engage them, not so much as perpetrators, but as partners, as a way to the solution to ending gender-based violence, it takes a different turn. And we've seen in our work with men and boys that that if we sit them down and even allow them to talk amongst each other, I think they know that they're doing something bad. The good thing that they realize they're doing something bad, but they say, you know, and they have this whole idea of saying that you know, sometimes it's a blame game. She provoked me into doing this. And we need to have these conversations with men and boys. And I really think that it starts also from the home, the way that these boys are brought up. We don't think that they're going to grow up into old men and then you start talking to them about all this. But if we socialize them, if parents take the role, active role, both mother and father, in the way that they bring up the boys and nurture them and mentor them into knowing that violence is a bad thing, it's evil to start battering your wife or your partner. I think that would make a little bit make a difference.
Okay, taking particular keen interest to a particular boy, maybe a young boy who's seeing, or even just a teenager, who's seeing the father batter the mother, and perhaps he has stood up, maybe tried to say, no, don't touch mommy, and he ends up also being beaten. That kind of boy, who then is able to sort of change his way of thinking about how a woman should be treated.
You know, there's so many, you know, our children are supposed to be mentored not only by father and mother. There's so many people who are mentoring. My children go through school, go through university, go to church, go to places where I believe that their thinking can change due to the mentoring by other people in the society around them. Because if a boy sees his father continuously battering, he gets traumatized, and sometimes it actually affects their lives and the way they grow up. But there are people around in the society. That's why we need to reach out there to the society to get them to mentor this boy, to nurture him into thinking. And actually, to be honest with you, we haven't done so much about nurturing and mentoring boys. And I think this is the time we need to talk about it and say, how are we going to change the way we approach the boys and the young men in the society, in our upbringing? Before, in the past, they used to say the uncles would do it. But the uncles are not always there for these boys, or for these young men. And so we need to all take it up as a responsibility to change the way that boys and men think, and I think that's what we need to do.
Okay, well, Doctor mentions the society bit of things and also how each of us has a role to play, and that's why this conversation is happening this afternoon. But bringing in the legal perspective of things, Immaculate, what have you seen? What are the trends from before COVID-19 pandemic within the country when it came to violence against women and girls, even during this time? What are you seeing, and what do you perhaps see past COVID-19?
Okay, thank you, Rita. What we are seeing before COVID, automatically gender-based violence has always been a big concern, a big national concern, and it's a lot of country economic when it comes to issues of money. But we have seen the trend continue to grow instead of reducing. We are seeing in COVID cases go much double higher. We are seeing people being killed in their homes. Why? Because now they are trapped with the perpetrators in their homes. We are seeing an increase of teenage pregnancy and child early marriage. Our young girls are, I don't know whether they will be even able to go back to school. Most of them are now pregnant, and others have been married off. All those are forms of violence. We are seeing a lot of fights happening in the home. At the beginning, you said death. We are seeing people dying in the hands of their perpetrators. But what is still challenging us is that no action is being taken. We are not seeing much action being taken. Who is investigating all these cases? The cases are going high, but we are seeing silence about it. We need to see action happen. The laws are there, the policies are there, the actors are there. What are the actors doing? What is police doing? What is DPP doing? What is Ministry of Gender doing, for example? All these are line ministries that are mandated to curb the increase of gender-based violence or violence against women. We need to see more action-oriented issues around this. As girls now, as schools are opening up, for example, what is going to happen to these girls who have suffered violence during lockdown? Will there be a policy that will allow, for example, some of the girls to go back and sit there their exams, those who are in candidate classes, and those who are not in candidate classes, will they continue to pursue their future? Or we are going to see a society in years to come where we have more of teenage mothers, where we have young mothers, where we have a society where girls have been coiled into a certain direction, that their future has been cut short. They can't take up their dreams as they ought to have been done. So there is a lot of questions where we need answers, right from before COVID and after COVID, and maybe this is the right conversation that we are having, that we need to see more action oriented to curb the vice that is eating up the country. Yeah.
Well, just to continue with the Immaculate, you mentioned, you know, as the cases go higher, some of these ladies were stuck, and girls were with their perpetrators at home. But from what you have seen before COVID and also within the COVID-19 pandemic, from the law, who do we see being the biggest perpetrator? Is it a family member? Is it a stranger?
Yeah, what we are seeing mostly under cases that at Uganet, for example, we have a call center. Every day a number of people are calling in, and majority of people who are calling in are women. And what surprises us is that most of the perpetrators are people who are close to you. The people you know. Could be your uncle, your relative, your father, your mother, someone within the community that you trust. Most of the young girls are being defiled by the people that they trust. And even their own relatives, even their parents. So the vice, though the community, the outsiders contribute, but we are seeing more of people around us, people we trust, people we believe are the people who are supposed to protect us, are the same people who are violating the rights of women and girls.
Okay.
Yeah.
Beatrice, from what she has mentioned, and she had mentioned it earlier, the silence. Yes, she's saying there are a number of women who are calling into Uganet, but you know, a number of times, how do I come out to say my father or my brother is doing this to me? The silence that for many they say is a pusher of violence against women and girls. It's the area that perhaps they are most vulnerable, because this is someone I know, this is someone I've trusted, this is someone I believe should protect me. Taking a look at this particular person and violence against women and girls, what's your comment on it?
When it comes to violence within a home, I should say, someone close to me, many times our expectation is that, okay, many times we least expect it to happen. And then when it does, you find yourself in that dilemma of failing to actually open up and own it up. And I think coming back from a community perspective, that is where probably we have not put an eye so much. Looking at a girl or a woman suffering violence from a close relative, ideally we would expect, for example, we've had the Sauti voice where they are reporting. Uganet is just declaring that people come and report, but internally within the inner being of that individual, how can that person be empowered to speak out? That is still missing. Because when you build up that inner fabric, making that person come out and speak out, then that is the beginning of letting it out there. So that is still lacking.
And that takes us to the vulnerability. Yes, it's silence, but the vulnerability. Women and girls, the numbers are higher there. Why are they so vulnerable? What exposes them so much to such violence?
For starters, I would say, especially for the young girl, power relations. We are seeing a lot of cross-generational sex issues, and this takes us to issues of teenage pregnancy, early pregnancy, and also issues of practices such as early marriages. And all this comes from the fact that that young girl does not have the power to speak out, the power balance. So many times we find that our male counterparts overpower the woman from the onset, is stereotyped to be the weaker gender. So because of that, you find that the power is an issue. Then also we are seeing that in terms of our own societal fabric, the stereotypes that accrue to the fact that I am a woman should be submissive, a woman should subdue. So you find that many times, because of that setup, women tend to hide behind that kind of stereotype. And then also, when it comes to the background of us women living with HIV, we are seeing that issues to do with structural issues, and as Immaculate alluded earlier, we are seeing structural issues which could be issues beyond the individual themselves, but an issue where we need a greater power to decide and speak on behalf of this woman or this child. We are seeing that the policies that are in place are actually the ones that are putting the women and girls under that vulnerability. Look at the HIV, from the HIV perspective, we are seeing policies such as APN puts a woman to the vulnerability that because APN has come, and knowing the good health seeking behaviors among women, this woman will be compelled to go to the facility for an antenatal visit. And because of that visit, gets to know their HIV status. But then the power to declare and disclose that status becomes a problem. And then this woman is forced to actually disclose unwillingly. And many times this has tended to actually escalate violence, which is intimate partner violence among couples.
Okay. Now, Doctor, we'll bring you in as well. Silence. On the issue of silence, and also what you mentioned, you had mentioned earlier on the social structures, and now in one way or another it elevates the boy, it elevates the man, yes, and gives him power over the woman. Yes. But then the silence, her voice, because we can say she doesn't have much, but she has a voice. She could be able to say something. Say, I am here, I am in pain, but I can't get out. Because another thing is also the economic insecurity. Exactly. Yes. Your comment on that?
And that's the reason why I really think that all these socioeconomic cultural norms that exist in society make the women and girls very vulnerable. There's been a lot of silence. The girl, she can't say anything. She's caught in that trap, and the woman in the relationship is caught in a trap where she's silenced. But also women and young girls are actually brought up to be told, be silent, be submissive. The way we bring up our girls, and even when they're going for marriage, you know very well, the Sengas take the girls on the side and tell them, this is how you are going to be in a relationship, which is completely, really, brings this girl to force herself to not to say how she feels, and otherwise she suppresses her, bottles up and suppresses her feelings. And this is one of the problems that we're having. And so the male partner takes advantage of that. After all, she's silent, and I can continue doing it. And actually you find that the cultural ways that we bring up our girls, some girls actually begin to even say that, if the man, and there are some people who say, if a man doesn't get angry with me, and then he doesn't care. So they have the wrong attitude of thinking that a man has got to care, to show he cares, and even he has got to react. And the reactions are very traumatic. Yeah. And that's why I was saying that we need everybody's intervention in this. You see, the whole thing is that we've been fighting this battle for many years. We come from long history of feminism and women's rights. We've done that for many, many years. So what do we need to do to change? And that's why when we formed the Uganda Men Engaged Network in Uganda years ago, and it has about 60 civil society organizations, including women-led and women's rights organizations, are members of the Uganda Men Engaged movement. We said something has to give way. And Uganda Men Engaged movement is one of the 22 Men Engaged Africa networks. So there is a big movement in Africa, and even internationally. There's a big movement in trying to change some of these cultural norms, and also trying to understand and to talk with men and to see how do we change these norms which have existed for a long time. It's a process, but I think we can get there if we all get together. And somehow we've got to involve other people. In our communities, we don't live alone, we live with our cultural leaders, our religious leaders. We live with our schools and school teachers, and the people in the community who we have to engage. So I think what I believe is that from the onset, we need to gather around and form a critical mass.
Okay. Well, I see Immaculate nodding, and we'll be getting into another conversation when once we get back from a short break. But when we get back, we'll start off, Immaculate, with silence. You mentioned that the calls coming from women, and perhaps when we get back, you'll tell us how many of these are sometimes a neighbor who says, there's this woman who is being beaten up every night. You know, because when we say we want to end it, I could be a neighbor to someone who's beaten up every day, but I am silent. And I can't, if I am seeing she's not able to make the call, how do I help her? Doctor has mentioned the fact that there's also the law, there's the policy, and so many other perspectives you're going to be getting into how we can end violence against women and girls when we get back.
It's not something to do with national prophecies, something to do with this nation, not something around here. There are places in life where there's a pattern to the person who lives in that dimension. It's either a pattern that they cannot be defeated. It's a pattern of rising up. It is a pattern. You enter in and your life changes. You get there and your life changes. Just like that.
There is not any man, prophet, psychic, whatever you may call them, that has stood in front of masses and has been that detailed and that specific about things year in, year out, and you have seen them before you.
Prophet Elvis Mbonye, the prophet with an unmatched record of prophetic fulfillment.
Your Fridays shall never be the same again.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your girl, Itanya, the life of the body.
And my name is Doug and Ice. Now listen, man. Every single Friday, nobody brings the party like we do.
That's why we are the MTV Mix Show, featuring the one and only DJ Brian, Fem DJ Dash, on a disco way.
From celebrating reggae music to celebrating Ugandan music, hip-hop and R&B, we blow up issues like nobody does. Let's bounce.
Wind the week down on the DJ Mix Show this Friday at 10 p.m. where the party never stops. For the first time ever, NTV Uganda presents the London Marathon 2020 live this Sunday, 4th October, starting at 10 a.m. Experience the prestigious competition exclusively on NTV Uganda as running legends Kipchoge and Bekele battle it out.
NTV, turning on your world.
This is the time to open our hearts and tell God to cleanse us.
Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing power?
You have to pray, and you need to fast, and then you need to ask the Holy Spirit to really come and do for you what God wants you to do.
Join the East and Central Africa Division President, Pastor Blasius Ruguri, this Saturday on our live TV Sabbath worship, only on NTV.
Thank you for staying with us here on NTV as we take a look at how we together can end violence against women and girls in the country. Now, earlier on with our panelists, we had a conversation about what different forms of violence against women and girls has taken on, and also why they are vulnerable, as well as what are the particular reasons that this continues to happen. Now, when we took a short break, we were having a conversation about silence, and how either it's silenced by the victim, but also a person who might know about someone who is actually facing this. And I could be an aunt, and I know that perhaps my niece is going through this, her father, or maybe even simply a neighbor is doing this, but I continue to remain quiet. And before we took a short break, Immaculate, I asked you if you have calls coming into Uganet of maybe particular neighbors or a concerned party who says this is happening to someone. How many cases do you have of that?
Thank you. I may not be having numbers offhand, but we are seeing neighbors. We are seeing a lot of vigilance now coming out from the community. And the community, we are looking at both the local leaders, the neighbors, and the cultural leaders, the church leaders come up and report. And close family relatives. Recently, I had a case I was handling at office, and the person who brought in the survivor of violence, or the person suffering violence, was a chairman LC1, but leading the elderly in the community. She had seen this family go through sexual violence for quite some time. And the man was saying that, for me, look, all I need is sex from this woman. But this woman had 2 children, one suffering from cancer, another one suffering from sickle cells. And the man had not taken into consideration that this woman could be having a lot on mind, that when it is time for having sex, she's not ready to do that. And the neighbor took it upon herself. She's a neighbor, she's a local leader, took it upon herself to seek help. And that's how they ended in our office for help. And in the calls that we also receive on the call center, there's a time that one person called in and had been hearing the neighbor batter the wife all the time and decided to call. And recently there is one we have in our shelter home, and this is a young girl and was being battered by the stepfather, and the person who called in was a friend who had got to know about what is happening. So we are seeing somehow communities changing attitude, but we are not yet there. We need more vigilance. Though there is that little response coming up, maybe attributed to what different actors are doing in sensitizing communities, but we are still seeing the cases increase. So as the cases increase, we need more people to be more vigilant, to be supportive, to let people out of the fear that when I report or when I support this person to report, I'm also protected. Most of people don't report because they also don't feel safe. If I report, I know you got police, the next person, first of all, you're over-interrogated. How did you know? And some of the neighbors or the community members are not comfortable to go through that. When, let's use even an example in sexual violence, where one of the requirements is you have to be a witness in court. And most community members are not really comfortable with how court settings are, the interrogation, the questioning happens. So the person says, I would rather keep quiet than reporting, and then I'm taken to court and they are asking me all these questions which I cannot defend. And then at the end of it all, when I go back to the community, I'm again blamed that you're the one who reported, you're the marriage breaker. That's what they usually say. Yeah. You're the marriage breaker, you're the one causing troubles. Personally, I was one time attacked even at court by men, and because it was a divorce matter, and when I was coming out, the men said, you women, you're the marriage breakers. So imagine if you're in the community and you're not empowered, and you know that you're supposed to go back to that community, and you've reported out of goodwill because you want to make sure that this person does not lose her life, and you go back to the community and the community is all ganging up and blaming you for reporting. So what will you do? You would rather just sit back and also look and let whatever happens happen. And that's why we are seeing maybe death happening when people know. And then they start saying, oh, I used to hear about this. This woman had actually told me and I didn't do something, but it is too late. The life is gone. We need to do more to empower all of us. It is all our responsibilities, like Doctor said. It is our responsibility to do something to end violence against women, to protect women and girls, and let it be a man, a woman, a neighbor, a community leader. We all have to take that step. And to take that step, the environment must be conducive.
Yes. Yeah. Now, you mentioned a number of stakeholders, because at this point in the conversation, we're taking a look at how you and I can end violence against women and girls. Now, you mentioned one thing: the environment needs to be conducive. Let's put into picture someone has come to Uganet, or perhaps has made a phone call. Uganet has followed up, and you have to go to the police first. This has to be reported. Beatrice, the conducive environment when it comes to the police. What is your comment?
I would give a comment based on experience in the community. Recently, I was in some of the districts where you earlier on mentioned the highest prevalence of violence against women and girls. And in terms of involvement of the police, I would say most of these cases do not make it up there. And the reason is, one of them, as my colleague Immaculate alluded, is the willingness to report. In one particular district in Bali, people are aware about violence. The women and girls know this and this is happening, and they are actually suffering. But in terms of the willingness to come out and report, it is not there. But then for the few who make it out there to the police and report their cases, most of the cases die a silent death. Why? And one of the reasons given actually by one particular probation officer was that many times people ask to facilitate the process, and you find a victim cannot actually afford to push the case ahead. So they lose the morale and fail to push the cases further. Other than that, there is the threat. Some of the victims are being threatened by the perpetrators, and just as earlier on I had stated, the power issue. Power is not about maybe only the gender, but who are you in society? What position do you hold? And who can you influence? So many times the victims are people who cannot speak out against their perpetrators simply because they have, there's that status quo. So the cases end up dying another silent death.
Well, when you mention silence first, you can't speak up. When you speak up, your voice is pushed down. And just bring you back into the conversation, Immaculate, you mentioned, when it comes to witnesses. Now, currently within the country, the judiciary for over 31 days now has been conducting 700 cases, special sessions against sexual violence, sexual and gender-based violence within the country. One of the things in a conversation with the principal judge yesterday he mentioned is that, yes, we are carrying this out, but sometimes the witnesses don't want to speak because maybe it's someone they know, and maybe even the family. As a mother, I can't come out and say, yes, it's my husband who defiled our daughter, things like that. And what is the result of such situations? Because if they have spoken out, and just preempt this, is that the principal judge mentioned that eventually with the lack of evidence, this case is dropped. And you don't find that actually justice has been achieved. So what is the result of having silence to now these two steps? You speak up, you go to police, pushed back down. What happens in such a situation?
Yeah, so the result, first of all, we have to thank the judiciary for the initiative they've taken, that for a very long time we never had those sessions, and right now we have the session, but the gap is still there. The witnesses are not ready to speak. The question we should be asking, and I think the principal judge should have even probably alluded to what could judiciary do. Probably it is an issue of witness protection. how is the environment protecting the witnesses? That when I come to court, I'm not put in open court. Yeah, I'm not put in open court where my neighbors, my in-laws, they are all going to be there and know that whatever I've said. Could it be a camera, a session that is held in camera? And because that environment is not there, people decided to keep quiet. Instead of losing my marriage, instead of losing my relatives, I would rather keep quiet. So we need to change the way things are done. Let's change the status quo. Let's make sure that if people have reported and probably someone that is ready to come and speak, is that person empowered enough? Have you assured this person's safety? Because the violence is a circle. Today it will be with this woman, and if I come and I am standing with this woman, it is going to turn against and be on my side. So how do we make sure that this other person is also protected? And this is the question we need to interrogate further. And probably it will take us maybe in the later conversation of other policies protecting us enough. Are the communities aware that when you do this is wrong? I think that's where we still have a gap to fill, to make people feel safe to report, but also to make communities feel safe to support those who are suffering violence.
Okay, now Dr. Munger, I see you agreeing to what Beatrice and Immaculate have said, and perhaps you will talk about what they have mentioned if you have an addition, but also when they mention the conducive environment. From the family level, sometimes a report is heard of, our son has been beating his wife. And they are quick to say, no, this can't be our son. Denial of that. This person is so prim and proper, how can they be doing this?
Exactly. Yeah. This is why I said that we need to engage all stakeholders, and I really feel that this shouldn't be a judiciary only thing. It shouldn't be a Ministry of Gender thing. It shouldn't be a responsibility of only NGOs and women's rights organizations, and that it should be everybody's responsibility. So starting from parenting from children, the way we bring up our children is very critical. But even we should be accepting that in our families, we can see the telltale signs. You know, sometimes I call them the telltale signs because within the family, you can see a young girl being sexually abused and everybody else is pretending there's nothing happening. So because my son is too proper, you know, the father is too good and the uncle is okay. So this is why I'm saying that the way that we need to build capacity and understand within ourselves that it starts from the household, it starts from the family, then it moves out to all the different sectors. This is why I'm thinking that in our country, if we leave it to the judiciary, if we leave it to Ministry of Gender, if we leave it to us, the NGOs, it's not going to work. Because we need to have the Ministry of Education, we have the teachers, there's a lot of rape and defilement in schools. There's also, I mean, in the Uganda AIDS Commission, we had a gender technical working group. We've done a gender assessment within Uganda AIDS Commission, and that's the one role they've taken. The Ministry of Health is very key to this because the Ministry of Health right now has a technical working group on gender-based violence. And, you know, they even have a male involvement working group, so which should be discussing violence against women. So, and then, of course, we must talk about all the other line ministries. And then we need to talk about the social, you know, and then private sector. And I really think that if we leave it only to us as civil society, in private sector, there are men who are young men who are corporate and they go out. So if you were asking me about the young boy, and I really think that we ourselves are the ones causing the denial within the family because we really see ourselves as if we are right and proper and there's nothing happening in the family. But everybody should have their eyes wide open. We should be able to see that this young girl is undergoing gender-based, the telltale signs I was talking about. We should be able to accept that the men within our families can do this and accept that they can do this. And that is that issue. So I think everybody's eyes should be open. But then the other thing is that someone will tell you that, for me, I don't know how a person looks like who's been violated. And that's the denial we're talking about. Can say, I don't know, I didn't know that this girl was being beaten. this woman is being beaten. So what do we need to do? So I think we need to galvanize everybody. We need to cry out there and shout out there there's gender-based violence, and we need to work with everybody to be part of this process.
Well, when Doctor mentions the fact that we need to shout, we need to work with everybody, going to the policies, Immaculate, and taking it back to 10 years ago, a decade ago, as the Uganda Parliament in 2010 enacted the Domestic Violence Act, which was made to make it much easier to punish perpetrators of domestic violence. But in your take, 10 years later, what do you say about this act?
The act, yes, we celebrated it as the movement, because for once we had a law that really targets gender-based violence. But along the years, as we tried to implement, we have realized that actually the law has a lot of gaps. One, the punishment, even when you engage with police and prosecutors, they are quick to charge a person under the Penal Code Act rather than charging under the Domestic Violence Act, because the punishment there is a bit, it is not to the level that you would want the perpetrator of violence, someone who has beaten someone and cut a person's hand, should be.
First, explain to us the difference between the two, with the Penal Code Act and the Domestic Violence Act, because for someone out there who's watching, it's the first time they're hearing of it.
Okay, so the Penal Code Act is the law that governs all the criminal justice issues. Let it be murder, let it be assault, let it be issues concerning theft. So it is broad. It has all the criminal issues. Whatever you report at police, in most cases, goes under the Penal Code Act, under the criminal justice sector. And the Domestic Violence Act has both the criminal and the civil part, that you can ask a protection order, for example, if you're facing violence in the home. That's one angle that we celebrate under the Domestic Violence Act, that to give a survivor of violence, that if I feel my husband is a threat to me, I can go to court and court issues a protection order. However, the question is, how are we going to implement that protection order? That's the question we are still struggling with, to see how do we address this. You can have a protection order and it still doesn't protect you anyway. That is an area we celebrate, but also has a weighing arm. And that is in the civil part. But in the criminal part, the Domestic Violence Act also gives punishment to the perpetrators, that you can be taken to prison at a sentence that is in the law. And the Domestic Violence Act also gives the LCs mandate to handle cases of gender-based violence. And in that, we celebrated the Domestic Violence Act, that for it gave a timeline, because most cases were dying at community level. The LCs would sit and they are negotiating some of these cases and not knowing the repercussions that will come after. So the Domestic Violence Act came up and said, if the case has been in the LC court for more than 24 hours, then it should move to the high court, to the higher courts, which could be magistrate court. And that we are seeing progress, but still the challenge at community is still there. So the difference between the Penal Code is broad, covers all sorts of crimes. And with the focus on gender-based violence was not that big. And the Domestic Violence Act strictly focuses on all forms of violence. Let it be sexual violence, domestic violence, physical violence, economic violence. All this is embedded in. Rather than, whereas in the Penal Code Act, it wasn't that specific. That if I'm being denied my access property, that is a form of violence. This side, they would look at it as a civil. For example, they would say, oh, it is land matter, so you go under the Land Act. And it is not given that big attention as an issue of who has power, which Beatrice was speaking to, who has power to control resources, who has power to control decisions in the home. The domestic violence embeds that and broadens that. to enable women to report and report all sorts of violence, including sexual harassment, which happens in most of our workplaces.
Okay. Yeah. Now, Immaculate, when you're mentioning this as a part of the act that can protect here and there, it helps in these particular areas. Beatrice, you have had conversations with ladies across the country, and even the girls. But in those communities, how many of them are aware of the policies, even if they have their loopholes, as Immaculate has highlighted? How many are aware of the laws and policies that protect them?
I would not speak in terms of numbers, but being a community person, I would say the situation is alarming in terms of awareness about the policies that govern us in this country. Not only even Uganda, coming from a regional perspective, we have similar cases in Kenya, in Burundi, Rwanda and Tanzania, where the international community of women living with HIV Eastern Africa is based. So basically the society that we live in, a few hear about policies and laws, and then the greater majority do not know. But then again, the bigger problem with the few that hear about the policies and laws do not have much knowledge in whatsoever as to the specific provisions that are in those laws and policies. So many times it is one of the reasons as to why they end up being overpowered and staying silent, because they cannot challenge and fend for themselves.
Okay, now this is when we bring in, because a number of, yes, the government has, perhaps the law has been enacted, it has been put in place, but when it comes down to whose responsibility should it be upon to make sure that the communities know, one, of these laws, two, are able to make use of these laws to protect themselves?
My thinking in terms of this particular question is that when the government comes up with laws and policies, it should not be an issue where it remains with them, because by the time these laws and policies are made, that means there's someone out there who it is intended for, and someone out there who should be knowing about it, someone out there who should be using it. So many times it ends at the duty bearers using, but in terms of who it is actually touching, the person does not get the chance to get the information. So I think we are all in this together, but the upper arm goes for the government of Uganda. So it has the ultimate mandate to make sure that the laws and policies that they make actually trickle down to that very last person down there.
Okay, now one of the people that has, and a group that has been a part of trying to help trickle all this down to the person is you.
Yeah.
And well, you're representing the international community of women living with HIV and AIDS Eastern Africa. What work have you been doing with these communities?
Okay, thank you, Rita. And so ICWEA has one of its core program areas is rising and eliminating all forms of violence against women and girls, and with particular focus on women and girls living with and affected by HIV. And in terms of what we've so far done, I look at this from way before even the COVID-19, because the COVID-19 brings with it different face of violence that has eaten up the society fabric. But looking at it right, stretching back from behind, issues of like the issues of information and knowledge of the laws and policies, I said earlier on the government has an upper hand, but as a community person and knowing what the communities go through and being empowered enough, ICWEA has taken it upon itself to actually look at some of these critical provisions within the laws and policies that exist and used them in their engagements with the communities down there that, look here, as a woman you are protected by this law, and as a woman you have the right that has been enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to speak out and fend for yourself. So that we have been able to do at the community level. And then also we've been able to actually make sure that we identify key figures within our own society, right from community to up to levels of duty bearers and levels of decision making, to make sure that we get champions who actually become the face of our society in terms of fighting violence against women and girls. So with the support from the African Women Development Fund, we are actually running a campaign, and which campaign looks at rising against elimination of violence against all forms of violence against women and girls. And in this campaign, we are looking at how do we get the policy makers and decision makers on board? How do we make the society aware that violence is happening? How do I make the Ministry of Health know that some of the policies like APN, assisted partner notification, are actually causing a problem and havoc amongst women living with HIV? How do I let the Ministry of Gender know that in as much as we have the Female Genital Mutilation Act, these are practices that are still going on in our country, are still going on in Kenya, and these are issues that need to be addressed in as much as the law is there, implementation is not taking shape. We have gone as far as to do assessments on gender-based violence. Some of the assessments look at gender-based violence in general prior to COVID-19, and some assessments have been done within the COVID era, and these are basically looking at how has the COVID-19 impacted on the lives of those particular women and girls living with HIV when it comes to issues of violence. And the findings will be something rather disturbing, to say that as a woman living with HIV, yesterday I was at liberty to keep my status to myself, but then because of the COVID-19, I find myself in a situation where I'm locked up with a partner and I am forced to actually disclose my status simply because the current environment has permitted someone to come and deliver drugs for me. So basically we have done that and a lot more. Yeah.
All right. Now, Dr. Munger, to bring you to the conversation, back to when I was mentioning and asking Beatrice, and she did mention that most of the ladies have no idea, women and girls have no idea of these policies.
Yes.
You were shaking your head.
No, I was agreeing.
You were agreeing, yes.
I was agreeing.
Yes. And from your interactions, you know, who do we place it on? Of course, you said we need to place it on the government, but who else? And you had mentioned earlier, it's not just on the civil society organizations. So who else should we place?
Well, for example, we started out Mama's Club as bringing networks of mothers living with HIV together in many districts, and we brought these rural mothers together, sat them down, and we'd work in partnership with Uganet to tell them about their rights, and you know their rights, and we trained them about gender-based violence, and then of course you know we'd also bring in their partners and we talk about gender-based violence. And we've done a lot of work also with getting male champions to form male action groups. And within the male action groups, the training package, talks about gender-based violence. But if you go out there in the community where these mothers and these women live, there's I would say there's lack of knowledge or lack of capacity to fight that the vices, the bad habits and bad things that go on within their communities. So at grassroots level, I really think that one of the things that should be the very grassroots leaders themselves, the elders and the cultural leaders. That's very important, because we can talk here in Kampala, but these women live in rural settings where they have got their elders and their the elderly people the elders and the clan leaders in the communities. So you may put them in a place and train them about their rights, but when they go back to their households, things are very different because the men are still battering them. So we think that bringing together couples and going through some kind of talk about the dangers of gender-based violence within couples. What we were doing was bringing families together, and it starts with family in the rural areas and talking to them. And then of course, then we move from the elders, and we've got our local district leaders, because local government plays a large part in this. You've got the district leaders who we have to also sensitize and talk to them. Then we've got church leaders and cultural leaders in the community, in the districts which we have to. Then you've got also the places where women go to. Women go to hospitals, women go to church, and families go to church. I'm not talking about women only, I'm talking about families or couples go to church. They go and the church leaders are very critical. People listen to their church leaders. They do listen to them. They listen to the cultural leaders. They listen to the clan leaders. Then when it comes to beyond district level, districts is important because we've got the district leaders. And we've got the CDOs, the community development officers at district level. Those are under Ministry of Gender. There's a structure. Then when you come into the center here, we've got NGOs, we've got private sector, we've got all the line ministries. And I think leaving this to one ministry, because as Immaculate was saying, sexual harassment takes place within offices. It takes place within offices in private sector. It takes place within offices in public sector. It takes place everywhere. Gender-based violence is everywhere. It takes place. So I think everybody has got to. And who else, as you are saying, we've got to also sensitize the children when they're still young. And that's a role of teachers, it's a role of parents. Then we move up. In tertiary institutions, we haven't talked about that either. We've got universities where this is all happening as well. So who do we talk to? We need to talk about the leaders in the universities. We've got to talk about the lecturers. Then we've got to move, and it should be a cry out there for everybody. And I think we've really tried very hard to talk about gender-based violence everywhere. I mean, we've really tried to spread the information. ICW, together with other partners, our organization and other organizations, have tried to shout out there. But you see, as Immaculate was saying, the policies that govern some of these laws, legislature, and these laws are the ones which we have to put into action, make sure that these policies are implemented. Because you can talk a lot of things and make a lot of laws. And then another thing is that I think the law enforcement officers need to get into, we need to also work with them, mobilize them, build their capacity to also understand that we need them as partners. So there's a lot of work to be done. We've been doing it for many years. The whole thing is, what you've got to understand is that for many years we've been fighting gender-based violence. What needs to change? And I keep saying to myself, what can I do differently amongst my mother networks, amongst the communities which I work with? What needs to change? And I think what needs to be changed is that we need, first of all, we need political commitment. And you can make as many laws as you want, but some of these laws are signed off. We need the parliament to really come out and say, this is what needs, we've got to stop this. And I think as my friends have been saying, the Speaker of Parliament has been very instrumental in trying to make sure these laws are passed. But the other members of Parliament have got to also be part of it. All these committees that take part in place in the Parliament have got to be shouting the same thing, stopping gender-based violence. All our policymakers.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Doctor. Now we're going to be taking a short break. When we get back, we're going to still be having a conversation about how together we can end violence against women and girls. We have been unpacking the different forms, who is to blame in one way or another, why are they vulnerable, but also now we've been taking a look at how we can all be a part of ending it. When we get back, you're also a part of the conversation. The phone line will be at the bottom of the screen. You can tell us what you think we can be able to do to end violence against women and girls, and also we'll be taking a look at protection of the victims, and moving forward, what happens next if someone comes out to say, I am being abused, what can be done? Thank you for staying with us on NTV. Now we're still having the conversation about how we all together can end violence against women and girls. We have panelists here with us in studio, but wherever you are and wherever you're watching us from, there's a call line where you can be able, just at the bottom of the screen, call in and share with us what perhaps your comments from what has been discussed, but also how you think we can end violence against women and girls. Now, still continuing with the conversation, one thing that we haven't mentioned is there's a particular area of violence that doesn't usually show up. We've talked about domestic violence, then there's gender-based violence, but then there's also this one which is forced sterilization, coerced. And Immaculate, I want you to explain to us about this.
So this is a form of a structural violence because it happens in the health institutions. And ICWEA did a study and we found out that women living with HIV were being targeted. Okay. Were being targeted because they are looked at to be vulnerable, to be marginalized, to be powerless. And the doctors or the medical workers thought it upon themselves that I will help you if I sterilize you by making sure that you don't conceive again, you don't have any other baby, without seeking their consent. And in other cases where consent is sought, it is coerced. They give you some sort of intensive, because they are looking at you as a poor woman, that if I give you a kilo of posho and you maybe go back home and feed these other children that you have, then let me stop you. Let me stop you at that, and you keep it up. You continue to live your life. But this is a structural violence. It's a structural violence because, and it is happening silently, and no one is taking action. We need to let women, whether I'm a woman living with HIV, whether I'm a woman with a disability, whether I'm a sex worker, whether I am an ordinary so-called normal woman walking on the street, that when I visit a health facility, whatever is being taken on my body, whatever decision you're going to do on my body, it should be a decision that is with informed consent. And informed consent has to be in terms of every procedure you're going to take has been well explained to me, that by the time I put my signature on that paper, by the time I say yes, I need to do this as a form of family planning, I need to do, to take a certain decision on my body, I've been well informed. But what we are seeing, what we saw in sterilization and probably what could be still happening, is that the doctors or the medical workers take it upon themselves and they feel like, oh, I am actually helping you. Yeah. And that is a form of violence in its way.
And we're going to continue with it, but for now, let's first take this call. Hello? Hello, good afternoon.
Hello?
Hello, good evening. Who are we speaking to and where are you calling us from?
We can see you in the TV.
Well, we can, thank you. Who are we speaking to and where are you calling us from? Well, we seem to have lost that one. Let's take this other call. Hello? Well, we'll get back to the calls. We seem to be having an issue with the lines, but when you mention, Immaculate, that, you know, this is your right. Whether you have HIV and AIDS, it's your right to conceive, it's your right to actually have this child. Beatrice, the rights, once again. The policies we mentioned and how many of them never know, but the rights that these women have that they are not aware of, and how much power they give the medical workers to give them this information and say, you know what, you shouldn't have this, you shouldn't go into the line of actually having a child because you have HIV and AIDS.
In terms of the rights, I would say the guiding document that would guide every Ugandan, not only Ugandan, coming from a regional perspective, what the laws that govern Kenya, that govern Tanzania, Uganda, Burundi and Rwanda are not totally different. I've had the opportunity to interface with some of the policy documents that are in all of these countries, but the narrative is the same. Only that the specifics of the geographical setup and maybe societal fabric is rather what is different. But when it comes to the particular law I'm talking of is, the guiding document is the Patients' Charter, Rights and Obligations. And by that document, every Ugandan or every Kenyan, Tanzanian, Ugandan and Burundian has a right to informed consent. But then the problem is when it comes to implementation, let alone implementation, over the years, my experience interfacing with the community and site level issues of monitoring, some of the health workers do not actually have any information as whatsoever in terms of what is stipulated in the patient's charter. What are their obligations and what are the rights of the patients? So many times you find that this is overridden, and then clients or patients are left to at the mercy of someone who has to decide for them. So when it comes to forced and coerced sterilization, a woman is not given the opportunity, just like Immaculate has alluded. This is it's a form of denial of the right to bodily autonomy and integrity. So you find that because I am a woman, and because I am a woman living with HIV, I do not have the right to have a child, and who in any way has the right to decide for me without giving me the adequate information so that I decide for myself. But other than this, the right to other than violating that particular right to have children, within the healthcare setting, we have a number of human rights issues in relation to access to services, and this relates to, earlier on I talked of structural violence. This relates to some policies like the APN, the Assisted Partner Notification I'm talking about, and the index setting. These are structural issues that actually infringe on the human rights of that particular woman, simply because this is a woman living with HIV. Therefore, the document or the policy says you have to elicit your partner so that they get tested. And knowing from where we are coming from as women, going back home with an issue such as reporting to your spouse that I tested positive for HIV and therefore you should come for a test too, so that we know where you stand. Rest assured, and with the evidence around, this has tended to increase the number of intimate partner violence cases.
Okay. Well, we're going to, as you can see just at the bottom of the screen, there's a number you can call to be a part of the conversation on how we can end violence against women and girls in the country. Let's take this call. Hello, good evening. Good evening.
Hello.
Hello, good evening. Who are we
Good evening,
speaking?
how are you?
I'm good. Who are we speaking to? And
Good
where you
evening,
calling
how
us?
are you?
I am well. How are you doing?
This is Godfrey Karevo Mitiana.
Yes, Godfrey. If you could kindly turn down the volume of the screen. We're getting some feedback.
But about gender-based violence, you have to bring the men on board. If we leave out the men, really, it's a waste of time.
Okay. Well, thank you, Godfrey. Now, from what Godfrey has mentioned, it takes us to the victim. And when I speak of the victim, yes, it might be a woman who has a son. That son is watching his mother being beaten day in, day out. In one way or another, he qualifies to be a victim as well.
Exactly.
So we're going to get into that conversation, but let's take this call. Hello, good evening. Hello, good evening. Hello, good evening. You're live on NTV. Well, we seem to have lost that one. Let's take. Hello, good evening.
Hello.
Who are we speaking to and where are you calling us from?
Good evening.
Well, the calls seem to be dropping, but as we get that figured out, Doctor will start off with the men. I mentioned that a boy can be a victim.
Hello.
Hello, good evening.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello, good evening.
Hello.
Well, the line
Good
is
evening.
not... Good evening. Who are we speaking to?
Hello. Good evening.
Good evening. Who are we speaking?
Good evening, Rita.
Good evening to you. Seems to be an issue there. Now, just getting back into the conversation, we'll be getting into the calls in a much later on stage. Doctor, let's start off with a man. He mentions the fact that we need to have the men in this conversation.
Exactly.
And some of the boys who are seeing their mothers being bitten, or perhaps something has happened to their sister, thinks this is a normal thing because these men are getting away scot-free.
Exactly.
Counseling this victim so that he doesn't eventually become one of the perpetrators later.
It's very important, and you must realize that such a child, a boy who's been brought up in a violent home, many times tends to end up being violent when he grows up and when he gets a partner. And we need to do a lot of, there needs to be a lot of work. Counseling is part of it, and also, that's why we mentioned that the counseling cannot be done by the mother and father alone. First of all, the father may be violent, and so he cannot be counseling his own boy. So this is why we need to get this counseling into all the institutions where this boy is going to go through. He'll go to school, he'll go to tertiary institutions, he'll grow up and go into marriage counseling, maybe when he's getting a partner, and maybe counseling by the rest of the members of the family, so that this trauma is removed. And sometimes he needs professional help, because some of these boys really get into real terrible status that they turn to alcohol and drug abuse. And you know very well that alcohol and drug abuse are one of the vices which predispose to gender-based violence. So you see this boy turning to, he's frustrated, so he gets into, I'm going to just go and drink it over, so that I don't, drink, take drugs, that kind of thing. And this really needs a lot of support. And we need the structures coming from, that's why I said everybody should get involved. But you talked about men, and maybe you said bring the men in. Some of the men are also undergoing gender-based violence. There may not be as many as the women, but you talked about men. And some of the men are undergoing, and with a man, it is very, very difficult to come out and say, I'm being battered by my partner. And that this is silence again. We've gone back to silence. So we need to be able to have that conducive environment that Immaculate is talking about, that even men can say, I have this violence. Because if a man goes to a law enforcement officer, they'll just laugh at him and say, how can you, as a man, be that weak to come and report this? So we've got to, this is why I said, we can't win the battle as women alone. We've got to bring in the men. We've got to bring in the men. We sit around the table. We've got to bring in men. And that's why I'm saying that's why the Uganda Men Engaged Network, which has got a number of civil society organizations and grassroots actors who have come together, we're really working hard to make sure that men are involved in this whole picture. And I'm really proud to be a member and a steering committee member of the Uganda Men Engaged, because I can at least now come out and discuss with the men and say, now men, this is it. And when we formed all those, by the way, these stories have come in. When we formed at grassroots level, Mama's Club has formed male action group members. We've mobilized male champions from the community, not from town, from center, but from communities. We've gone out there to let the men talk to each other as well. And we've trained peer mentors amongst the men. So you've got to bring in the men. We can't do it all by ourselves. And I'm proud of the fact that that men are building onto the feminist movement. I mean, it's the women who started shouting about gender-based violence, but we need to bring in the men and discuss this together with the men.
Okay, well, we are running out of time, so as we wrap this up from Immaculate, Beatrice, I want you to just encourage a lady who's out there who's watching us this evening, and perhaps she has a sister, or perhaps it is her. She has experienced a particular type of violence. Is it ever too late for someone to call and say this happened? To call out their perpetrator? And two, how can you just encourage her to go ahead and end it with her making that simple call? I'll start with you, Immaculate, and end with you, Beatrice.
Okay. Thank you, Rita. And to the viewers out there, that what we all need to know is don't suffer in silence. People are there to help. There are NGOs to help. The courts are open. The police is open. Don't keep quiet. Report the cases. report the cases, reach out to legal aid service providers, reach out to police. Where you feel you're frustrated, as Uganet, we provide free legal aid services. We are available to help in one way or the other, to follow up the cases to the end. We call upon everyone, every person out there, that if you know the neighbor or if you're in a relationship where you're suffering violence, whatever form of violence, please don't keep in silence, because silence will lead in more big problems that will affect everyone around you, around the community. The community will never be the same. So if we don't take action, if we don't all be proactive as community, then we end up all suffering. So it is time, and the time is now, that all of us need to stand up and speak up and do something to end violence against women.
Exactly.
Okay. And Beatrice, your last words on that?
Thank you, Rita. You'll pardon me to go a bit extra mile. And to the woman out there, the young girl out there who is suffering violence, earlier on, just like I said, the biggest problem in the community we have is they are aware, but the willingness to report is not there. So I need, as a mother, as a sister, as a brother, as an auntie, as a stepmother, we need to support our girls, we need to support each other and protect one another. So when someone in the household, be it a friend, be it a neighbor, is going through a certain form of violence, be it rape, be it marital rape, it's happening, though people do not want to talk about it, we need to stand out and stick out for each other and one another. We need to support the people suffering. Why I said I wanted to go an extra mile is in as much as this is happening to women and girls out there, I have a passion and a very bigger concern, especially for the constituencies of the persons I serve, the women and girls living with HIV. And they have rather unique forms of violence that many times are actually not of their own making, but it is because of the setup and the way the HIV response at large looks at how to support these the women and girls living with HIV. So for me, other than looking at that girl and that woman out there, I want to call upon the actors within the HIV response to look at the community. This woman who is suffering the violence, we have come a long way with mainstreaming gender, and this is to say that within the Ministry of Health and particularly the HIV response, gender has taken a step in terms of mainstreaming. It is part of the National HIV Strategic Plan. But then when it comes to the response and designing particular response mechanisms, particularly for people living with HIV, that has remained silent. And in terms of prioritization, issues of gender are not prioritized at all. So in order to break that chain of letting this woman and girl suffering in the hands of structural issues in relation to the HIV response, I think I call upon the actors to come together and involve the communities, because I do know and we do believe as ICWEA that the most effective interventions are those that involve the persons that are most affected. So I call upon them for that.
All right. Well, thank you, Beatrice. Well, Doctor, we are quite short of time, so I'll just give you a minute.
I just want to talk about the violence against people living with disabilities. Really, you know, some women who are living with disabilities, and girls and women, have been also abused because they can't move, they can't run away, and people have used them. And I really want us to remember that we have to work so hard to fight violence against people living with disability as well.
Well, as Doctor has mentioned, there are a number of groups, the vulnerable groups, and this conversation is just starting. This is not the end. Next Thursday, we'll be having a conversation how we can build a movement of people beyond age, beyond gender, beyond religion, beyond tribe, and beyond status quo on how we can end violence against women and girls in our country. Having been joined to have this conversation this evening, I was joined by Dr. Lydia Munger, who is Executive Director, Mama Club. Next to her, Omugisha Immaculate, Head of Advocacy and Strategic Litigation Department at Uganet, and Beatrice Ajonye, I hope I'm saying that right. Yeah. Ajonye, yes. Project Coordinator, International Community of Women Living with HIV and AIDS, Eastern Africa. Thank you, ladies, for joining us in this conversation. Like I have mentioned, it's not the last. There will be another one next Thursday. From us to you, have a good evening.